Alright, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel, and today it's time for my meta predictions for EUIC. I'm going to be talking about what I think is going to go down in the tournament, how popular each deck will be, and just kind of how I think decks will place within this tournament. EUIC is going to be the biggest tournament of the year so far. I cannot wait for it. I'm competing. I think I've locked in my deck. I'm pretty safe what I want to play, and I'm definitely excited to compete this weekend. My first time in London. If anyone's going to come up to me and say hi to me, this video I think is going up on the Thursday, so make sure to come up and say hi and all that good stuff. And I'm excited. If you all are new here to the second channel, make sure to subscribe down below. We're on the road to 21,000 subs or 22K if we're already there by now. And of course, leave a like in the video if you enjoy the content. And let me know what your predictions for EUIC are. So starting things off, we got Dragapult, which I think is the best deck right now in the format. I know that Gardevoir is also talked about a lot as one of the BDIF, but I do think Dragapult is really just one of the top decks right now. It's really powerful, and I think that it can almost beat anything. It doesn't really have like any like truly standout bad matchups, except for maybe one deck. And Dragapult will most likely be the deck that either has the highest chance of winning the tournament, but I also think it's going to be the most popular deck in the room, and we'll talk about where I think it'll fall in my meta percentage breakdown a bit later on in the video in Trainer Hill. Gardevoir, though, is still very close behind it. I don't think Gardevoir is going to be as popular as Dragapult, but I know that a lot of big-name players going to EUIC are playing Gardevoir this weekend. So basically, expect to hit Gardevoir. Now, one thing with Gardevoir, though, is there's a couple different ways people are building it. I mean, we have the Michael Davidson build here from Merida, but then there's also still using the Drifloon Bravery Charm package. The Secret Box Turbo build still might be lurking, but I think Gardevoir definitely is a deck you need to expect to beat this weekend. It's going to be not as popular as Dragapult, but it'll definitely be out there, and I do think you want to make sure that your deck does not just lose to Gardevoir, because, again, like I said, a lot of the top players are going to be playing Gardevoir. It's a very good chance that, like, good players are going to play the deck. If you go far in the tournament, you'll probably hit one of them, and you'll have to play against Gardevoir. It's another deck that I wouldn't be surprised if we saw at least two in top 8. Definitely, that's my prediction right now. There's going to be 2 Gardevoir in the top 8 of the tournament. Miraidon's play rate is also going up, mainly because it did so well at Merida. I do think Miraidon is a little bit worse for EUIC after Merida, in my opinion. I think Miraidon is a bit worse for this tournament. The surprise factor, I guess, is gone, but it's still a very powerful archetype. It still has a decent Guardy matchup. Your pull matchup is close. A lot of pull lists now are playing Klefki, which does make this matchup a lot worse for Miraidon. We might see more stuff like Archaludon and Cloth get more popular, which I think is going to happen. Raging Bolt, another deck I expect to see a little bit more play rate. Miraidon definitely is going to be a bit worse for this tournament. It'll still be semi-popular. I think it might be more popular than Gardevoir. I don't know if we'll see a Miraidon make top 8 again. I don't think that'll happen. It can be possible, though. Miraidon's a deck that when you have a hot tournament run, you can kind of run over everyone and do really well. Archaludon, I think, is going to be popular this weekend, too. Archaludon seems like a very decent archetype right now. Its meta spread is decent. The one problem, obviously, like I said, well, it's a good deck. Its Guardy matchup is definitely going to be the biggest issue with the deck. I don't think this deck really beats Gardevoir. Like, a good Guardy player, especially knowing that Guardy players will always be adapting tournament to tournament, I don't think Archaludon is going to be great into Gardevoir. I have seen people adding in Black Belt's training, though, which does make the matchup a bit closer, because you can go Relicanth plus Black Belt to knock them out. You have to play 4 Jamming Tower to slow them down. I think Archaludon is, like, a decent deck, and its play rate will also be going up this weekend, I predict. So expect to see some Archaludon do well. I guess like the prediction is, like, is it going to be more popular than Dialga Archaludon? I think the normal build is probably going to be popular. It's kind of interesting because I think both versions are definitely very strong. The Dialga build is maybe a little bit more appealing to players just because Dialga is a really fun card to play. But is it better than just not playing it is going to be the question. To be honest, in my testing, because I've also considered Archaludon for UIC, I find that the build without Dialga is better. Dialga I find is a bit more of a liability, but when you pull it off, it's really good. That's my opinion, though. But I do think Archaludon will be popular. We haven't seen one crack top 8 at like a huge tournament yet, so we'll have to see if Archaludon can finally top 8 UIC. Lugia's in a weird spot. Miraidon bullied it out of doing good in Merida, but this definitely could still be a decent tournament for Lugia. It's another deck that I wouldn't be surprised to see do well. I don't think it'll be as popular as it could have been just because of what happened at Merida. Miraidon also is going to be more popular. But I also don't think a lot of the top players are going to be playing Miraidon. That's another thing. I don't think a lot of the top players are on Miraidon this weekend, which is a good thing for Lugia. I can see Lugia doing well this weekend. Top 8 definitely is reasonable, especially if Miraidon maybe gets bullied a little bit. It's possible we could see a Lugia in top 8 for sure. Lugia, I think, can do well this weekend. I don't think it'll be very popular, though. Lost Box is a weird one. This is kind of a wild card pick. I don't think Lost Box is going to be popular, but I do think there's a good chance that Lost Box will have a pretty good weekend. I think that a few players will do well with it. It's a deck that I would be a little scared of if I'm going into this tournament and I'm taking a bad Lost Box matchup. It's one of those decks where, like, it feels like it's a very underrated play for this tournament, and I think a lot of players are going to realize that and play it. Spoiler alert, I guess, leak. This is a deck that I've also considered for EUIC. I really do like Lost Box. I'm a huge fan of this deck, right? And I played at LEIC. But I think Lost Box is in a decent spot right now. Especially if decks like Archaludon, Raging Bolt are getting more popular. Gardevoir is not playing Flutter Mane and Klefki and Budu. I think your pull matchup's good. Like, the deck is just, it's Lost Box, man. And there's nobody playing Regidrago, which is, like, the main reason why the deck is so strong. Lost Box top 8, I think it could definitely happen. Definitely a deck I'm a little scared of this weekend, if I'm playing a deck losing to Lost Box. All right, Cloth Terapagos, another deck that it's weird. This deck's probably not going to be very popular, but I think that it will be a deck you probably want to look out for. Going in the tournament, if I'm going second, considering mentioning 2 basics. Just the threat of the deck is very real. It's a deck that I don't think is, like, it's just tough to say. Like, I don't think it's going to be, like, super popular, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was played by a few decent players. Like, it's definitely a weird one for sure. I would probably be a little wary of this deck. Can it make top 8? Maybe. It's good into Miraidon, right? And Miraidon's play rate is going up a little bit, which is good for the deck. Raging Bolt. So, much like Lost Box, Raging Bolt is another deck that I think is actually secretly a really good deck for this tournament. Dragapult, I'm expecting to be the most popular deck in the room. Raging Bolt, arguably, out of every deck in the format, has the best Dragapult matchup, and I think that that's a good thing for Raging Bolt players. Raging Bolt just seems like a very powerful archetype right now. Obviously, you are going to take a bit of a shaky Guardy matchup. That's like the downside of playing the deck. Your Archaludon matchup also isn't very good either, but I don't know. I think Raging Bolt's like a decent play. Like, if you want a deck that just beats Dragapult, like, this is probably a good pick for the tournament. Raging Bolt top 8 is definitely an interesting decision, though. It's like, okay, can I make top 8? I'm not too sure. But another deck that I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Bolt have a decent showing, just because I think it actually is a decent deck for this tournament. Next up is Gholdengo. I love Gholdengo. Obviously, it's a deck I've looked at for UIC myself. Gholdengo is also not a bad spot, much like Raging Bolt. It's good into most of the top decks right now. It does have a bad Lost Box matchup, and like I said, I think that deck might be a little bit more popular, or at least might be a deck to keep my eye out on. Your Cloth matchup isn't ideal either, mainly because they have Budu now. You have bad Snorlax and Control matchups. It's a very, like, polarizing deck in that regards, but Gholdengo's not a bad deck for this weekend either, so we'll have to see how the Dingus does. Next up is Control and Stall decks. Pidgeot Control, I think, has the best chance of doing well. It's an IC. A lot of the top Control players go to these tournaments, and they usually do pretty good. So, wouldn't be surprised if we saw some Control at the top tables throughout this weekend, played by the top Control players. So, yeah, Control, usually for, like, a regional, I would not put as much emphasis on this deck, but for an IC, if you're going to go far in the tournament, you probably want to have a decent time into the Control matchup, or at least know how to play against it, or hopefully have an idea of what a 60 looks like, though. If you're playing against Sander, you're probably going to have a hard time, because he always cooks up some, like, insane list. But, yeah, Control definitely is a deck I'm a little bit cautious of this weekend. I don't think it'll be very popular. Like, I'm not saying you're going to hit it the first couple rounds, but the deeper you go in the tournament, you might hit a Control player. Just saying. It's a deck that I think will have a better time in the top tables than in the bottom tables, if that makes any sense. Just a deck that if you have a deep run, just expect to see one potentially, right? Because there are players going to this tournament who play Control. Like, it's an IC. Snorlax is a weird one. Actually, I think this deck is, like, not at a bad spot right now. Nobody's really respecting it. Its matchup spread isn't terrible right now. I think Snorlax has a decent chance of doing well this weekend. Another deck that I'm not really scared of, I would maybe be a little bit more scared of Snorlax and Control, just because I think this deck has a better chance of being more common than Control, even at, like, the lower tables. But I do think Snorlax is not a bad deck. I personally won't be playing it this weekend. Spoiler alert, I do not have any goals of playing a stall deck, but it's a deck that definitely you got to keep your eye out on. Can it make top 8, though, is going to be the question. I'm not too sure. Like, again, not a lot of people are really respecting the deck right now, but it does take some pretty bad matchups against stuff like Archaludon, especially if they play Heavy Turo, and also the matchup against Lugia never has been very good. but we'll have to see. Because I don't think Snorlax is going to play Temple this weekend because nobody, like, Lugia's play rate is most likely going to go down a little bit. And I don't think Snorlax is going to play Temple. They're most likely going to play Artisan to play around Budew, in my opinion, because you want to make sure you're having a decent time in a Dragapult. Dragapult is very winnable, especially if they're not playing Turo or they're just playing one Turo, one Switch. It's still decent. But I do think Snorlax is going to pivot to more Artisans than Temple of Sinnoh. So you're going to take a worse Lugia matchup. But I think Snorlax is, like, okay. Next up is Ancient Box. This is a deck that I also think is like a sleeper pick for the tournament. I don't think it's as good as like Lost Box for this tournament, but I don't hate this deck. I did a deck profile on the channel here. Like, I think the deck's pretty solid. It's a decent play for the tourney. You have a good matchup into Gardevoir, in my opinion, especially if they're not playing Unfair Stamp. The matchup actually becomes pretty solid. Yeah, it's decent. If you play Monkey Dory, your matchup versus Pult is a bit closer. You have a decent time into Archaludon and Raging Bolt, and Miraidon's close. You basically have to either make it so your board isn't ampable, or you have to respond KO the hands immediately, or something like that. But it is very much a decent matchup. So I think we'll see Ancient Box. I don't know if it'll do well. It hasn't really had a good performance since, like, what, Orlando last year? And that was in the Charizard meta, which was not great for this deck. I wouldn't be surprised, Ancient Box top 32, it's possible. Next up is Dragapult Charizard. I'm not a believer in this deck personally. I think this deck is worse than the normal Dragapult Budew deck, but I do think this deck is still fine. Like, it's a decent enough play where people will probably bring it regardless. I think this deck also, like, originated in the EU region, which is, a sign. The deck's fine. I think it is worse than normal Dragapult, but it's a decent play still. It's not the worst deck ever. Charizard is actually a good card for this weekend specifically. I just don't think Charizard is a good deck for this weekend, if that makes any sense. So maybe the best way to play it is with Dragapult, even though I don't really think this deck is very good. Or at least doesn't have a good pull matchup. I will say this, your Guardy matchup is probably fine. So that's good. You have a decent time in a Guardy. Your Miraidon matchup's probably good. I would imagine it's, like, fairly close. I mean, yeah, I think the deck's good. Just I don't think it's better than normal Dragapult. But you maybe take an easier Miraidon matchup if you play this. But then again, normal Dragapult teching Klefkeys is just going to be better for the deck. So I don't know. We'll have to see. But, I don't think this deck is the best deck ever. But if your opponent flips over a Dreepy, be cautious. They might be also playing Charizard. Just keep that in mind. Next up is Ceruledge. I like this deck. I've been testing a lot of it recently, and I do like it. I did a video on it on the main channel a few days ago. I think it's actually a pretty solid play. One thing I don't like about the deck, though, it has a very bad Lugia matchup. It is by far your worst matchup. But Ceruledge isn't bad. This could be the tournament for Ceruledge to have a better run than what it's had before. It's definitely a strong archetype. I think it has a good matchup versus Dragapult if you don't lose to Budew. Your Archaludon matchup's pretty good. Gardevoir's close, 50-50, maybe unfavored if they play Manaphy, if you're not playing Cologne. But yeah, I think Ceruledge is a decent play. It's not a bad deck. I think somebody might do well with it this weekend. Next up is normal Charizard decks. Now, if we're talking straight Charizard, Pidgeot, I don't know where this deck lies right now. I really think this deck has just fallen off from grace, and I think that the thing with the funny thing with this deck, while I think this deck is not a good deck right now, I think that people are still going to play it because they like Charizard. Don't play Charizard. Now, I'm not saying you can't be Budew. You can tech for Budew with TM Evo and multiple fire energies, but I still think that your pull matchup is still just not very good. It's basically the same thing as the Drago matchup last format, though I think this time around, your matchup versus Dragapult might be even worse than the Regidrago matchup, just because of the Budew. And also, if people play Drago this weekend, that's also collateral damage. So, I don't know, like, I don't think Charizard Pidgeot is a good deck at all right now. I think that it's, like, fine, I guess, if you dodge Dragapult. But I don't know, man. I personally wouldn't play the deck. I also don't think you're good into Gardevoir. Now that Guardy's playing Mimikyu again, that's not a good thing. I don't know. I just think, like, the deck is just very, like, okay. Like, it's a very, like, it's an average, like, okay deck. But I don't think it'll, like, do great this weekend. I don't think many top players are even playing the deck. I don't know. Like, just... It might be a little popular because it's Charizard. I just don't think it's a good deck for this tournament. I wouldn't expect to see it in, like, top 32. Maybe a top 32 at most. I don't think it'll be any higher than that. I do want to mention Drago real quick. Now, in my tier list video, I said Drago dropped down a few tiers, and I still stand by that. I think Drago is still a little weaker for this tournament, especially now that, like, Archaludon is going to be popular for this tournament. Also, Raging Bolt, its play rate might go up a little bit, which is not a good thing for Regidrago. I will say this, though. It's definitely not a bad deck still. Like, it's still Drago. It's still a very powerful archetype, right? Is it worse than just normal Dragapult Budew? Probably, like, at that point, played Dragapult, but I think Drago's still, like, a decent enough deck where I think enough players will play it. I don't think it'll be popular, but good chance we might see a few big names on the deck this weekend. I think that is possible. Top players might play the deck. It feels like one of those like Lost Box. No one's thinking or looking at the deck, and that might be a good thing for the deck. But I don't think the deck is like insane. But it's fine, right? It's a good enough deck where I think a few top players might play it, and they might make some more innovations to the list to counter the format. All right, pull Thorns. I think this deck is probably the weakest way to play Dragapult right now. Its matchup into Miraidon is a lot stronger than normal Dragapult builds because of the Iron Thorns. You can start with it, but if you don't start Iron Thorns, it's like pretty bad. Pull Thorns is like an okay play. I don't think it's like the best deck ever. It's also not great into the mirror match, right? That's my issue with it. Even with the Monkey Dory, I still don't think your mirror match is very good. You rely a little bit too heavily on like Precious Trolley. So if Dragapult makes you go first and then you don't get Trolley turn 1, which obviously you're not going to do most of the time, they're just going to Budu you and you're probably not going to play the game. Because Dragapult doesn't really mind getting Thorns because they can just sit there and like spam Dracloak for like 5 turns, right? So that's kind of my issue with this deck. Quad Thorns is weird. I've seen a lot of propaganda for this deck recently. This deck isn't great for this tournament. I don't think it has many good matchups. I think your best matchups are like Archaludon and Control if they're not playing Dialga. And everything else is like not great. I don't think you're good into Dragapult at all. That matchup seems abysmal. Like Judge and Prey with Crush and Hammer can maybe get you over the line, but probably not. If they just put like a bunch of Dracloaks and play, good luck beating that matchup. Yeah, Quad Thorns is not a good deck. I think it'll still be played by some players. I don't think any top players, but like, would be surprised if one of them snuck through and did okay in the tournament. But other than that, yeah, I don't. The deck is what it is. Palkia variants, I think, are on the decline. I wouldn't be surprised if Palkia flopped. Maybe Palkia Noctowl does okay, but I don't think it will. I do want to mention Giratina Lost Box, another weird sleeper deck of this format. I don't know if it's better than normal Lost Box. Normal Lost Box might just be a better deck than Tina, but Tina maybe has a better time into Dragapult, and that might be a good thing because you get to start Requiem. Also, your Archaludon matchup is still good. I don't know. Like the deck's fine, I guess. I don't know. I haven't really put much time into the deck personally, but I wouldn't be surprised if Tina had like some weird run. It's like a bit of a wild card pick. Then yeah, Palkia Dusknoir. I think this is the best way to play Palkia right now if we're gonna play a Palkia deck. But even then, I don't think it's like anything insane. It's cool though. And then finally, I want to mention Arc Armor Rouge. I've been playing this deck a bit recently too. As somebody who likes his Arc decks. I want to see this deck do well at EUIC. It did good last year at EUIC. Yo, you got to run it back and have another good finish this year. Just saying. It's a cool archetype. I want to see it do well. All right. Time for the meta breakdown portion of the video. Let me just rearrange this real quick. Okay. So, meta breakdown. So, here's my predictions of where things are going to fall. So, the first thing is going to be Dragapult, the most popular deck in the room. I'm going to estimate anywhere from like 15 to 18%. I'm going to go 18%. Very good chance Dragapult is the most played deck in the room this weekend. I think 18% is very reasonable. Like, that might be a little too high, but I think it's possible. I mean, it's the best deck right now. It's a good deck. I think 18% is very reasonable. Keep in mind, we're at an IC. People are going to want to play the best of the best because it's an IC, meaning that the best deck is going to be the most popular deck, and its play rate might go up. The next deck behind it will probably be Guardy at like around 11%. That might be actually way too high, but I think 11's like okay for Gardevoir. 11% for Guardy feels like probably pretty accurate. Yeah, I mean, it's just the problem with Gardevoir is people don't want to play because it's hard to play. But again, like I said, a lot of top players are going to be playing it this weekend. That's the thing. There's going to be a lot of big names on the deck this weekend. So you got to keep that in mind. 11% I think is okay. There's a lot of hype for the deck also, and people might buy into the hype and just play it anyways, even if they aren't good at the deck. Like, I don't know. I think 11% is, like, fine. Miraidon I have around probably 9%, maybe 10%, somewhere in that range. Seems like it's, I mean, like I said, it's worse for this tournament than it was Merida, but it did win Merida, and that, like, hype does carry over, in my opinion. Then we got Lugia, which I think will probably be around, like, 8%. Probably a bit lower than Miraidon, but still like fairly high because Lugia has a lot of devoted fans, and it's still a good deck. And also, if people predict Miraidon to not do as well, then it's good for Lugia. But I think Miraidon will still be fairly popular, at least in the top 3 most played decks. So that's still bad for Lugia. Next up, we got what other decks? Archaludon. It's another 8% deck. 9% actually might be even more accurate, genuinely. But I think 8% is like fine for the deck. Keep in mind, people might be scared of the Gardevoir matchup, which is the one thing holding the deck back. But I think 8%. 9% seems pretty good. Would Archaludon really be higher than Lugia in the meta share? You know what? Yeah, I'm going to say, Archaludon actually has a good chance of being 9%. I think Miraidon and Archaludon will be around the same percentage in the tournament. Yeah. I buy into that. Yeah, I think Archaludon 9% is pretty accurate. I don't know if it'll be 10%. Yeah, 8 to 9% seems good. I think that's decent. There's a good chance Archaludon is more popular than Lugia. Also, it has a good Miraidon matchup, which is good. Next up, I'm going to mention Raging Bolt, which I think can be around 6%. Yeah, 6 seems fine. 7 honestly is a bit more accurate because it is Raging Bolt at the end of the day. A lot of people are just attracted to the deck because it is Raging Bolt. It's a pretty easy deck to play, and it's, like I said, that Dragapult matchup is very good. Arguably has the best matchup versus Dragapult out of any deck in the meta right now. Like, unless for some reason you hit a Dragapult with, like, League Headquarters, which is most likely not going to happen. Yeah, 6% seems pretty good for Raging Bolt. 7%, you know what, screw it. I'm going to go 7% on this one. It's a good deck, man. It beats Dragapult. A lot of people are going to realize that and play it. And it's also a very straightforward deck that people like to play. Next up is Charizard. There's 2 Charizard decks here, but we'll just make Charizard Pidgeot the main one. If we're not combining Pulsar, I'm not going to count Pulsar on this tier list. Charizard Pidgeot has a good chance of being like 6%. I'm not going to go higher than that. Like, if this deck ends up being like higher than 6%, I'm going to be like, what the heck, man? Why are people playing this deck? To a tournament where Dragapult and potentially Gardevoir are going to be very popular. Okay, like, to be fair, looking at Charizard, you're beating Raging Bolt, Archaludon, and Miraidon, but, you know, that Lugia matchup has never been, like, historically that good, unless you're attacking Temple of Sinnoh, which I don't think Charizard players are going to be playing Temple this weekend. If anything, they're going to be playing Jamming Tower and Collapse Stadium. But Charizard being 6% feels fine. I don't know. If this deck ends up being higher than 6%, bro, I don't know what to tell you, bro. That's just some sorcery right there. Next up, I want to mention Cloth. 5%. Yeah, 5%. Cloth feels pretty accurate. Goldengo, it's another deck. Probably 4%. Yeah. I think Cloth will be more popular than Goldengo. Lost Box also, I predict to be around 4 to 5% of the meta. Yeah, I mean, the problem with Lost Box, I think the deck is genuinely a decent deck for this tournament, but also it's harder to play than most decks. Like, kind of like Gardevoir, right? The deck is good. Top players are most likely going to be playing the deck this weekend, but the more, like, casual players are not going to want to play a deck like Lost Box because it is harder to pilot. Even though I will admit the Pikachu build is a bit more easier to play than most Lost Box builds because you're just going Pikachu over and over again. So 10% seems fine for the deck. Or not 10%, 4%, sorry, seems fine for the deck. I'm thinking if it should be up maybe to 5%. Yeah, you know what? I'm going to put Lost Box at 5%. It's a sleeper pick. Andrew Hedrick playing the deck genuinely could be a big thing. And I can't talk. I have seen some talk about the deck on Twitter for some big name players. Like Ian Robb has been hyping the deck up. So I think 5% is fine. Yeah, 5%. It's just people are not going to want to play the deck because it is Lost Box, right? It's hard to play. Sometimes it's not a fun deck to play because you get these bad hands, bad flower selects. I don't know. It's fine. Drago, 2%. Control, 3%. No, 2%. Snorlax, for sure, is like a 3%, or maybe even 4%, to be honest with you. Snorlax I can see being a bit higher. 4% is a bit more accurate. It is an IC. People like to play these more, like, cheesier decks to an IC because it's easier to win with them in general. But I guess, like, the skill is a bit worse because more top players are playing at the IC, they're more accustomed to beating Snorlax. 3% feels okay for that. 2% Pidgeot also seems correct. Ceruledge, I'm going to put around 3% too. I don't think it's as good as Goldengo, but I think that it's not as fun as Goldengo. I don't know. It's weird. Ceruledge probably around 3%. It's like, in my opinion, that's like an okay place to put the deck. That seems about it for my meta predictions. I mean, we have 92% left. Like, stuff like Quad Thorns, maybe Palkia variants fills up the rest, and then other probably be like 6% of the format would be like other. But I think it's like an okay meta share. Like I said, I expect Dragapult to be the most played deck at around 18%. Gardevoir will be above 10%, but not by much. Miraidon, Archaludon will be in that like 9% range. Lugia, 8%. Raging Bolt, I think, will be a bit more popular. Charizard, just because people like to play it, even though I think the deck sucks. Pikachu, Lost Box, 5%. Yeah, this seems fine. I would maybe bump up Cloth to a 6%. Actually, yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm a bit of a hot take. I think Cloth genuinely could be more of a 6% meta share deck. Yeah, 6% for Cloth is okay. 5%, 6%, it's like going to be in that range, I think. But yeah, there you go. That's my meta predictions for EUIC this weekend. I'm excited to play in the tournament. I'm excited to visit London. And hopefully I can make day 2, another IC. It'd be pretty sick. Hope you enjoyed the video on the meta predictions. If you did, leave a like. If you're new to the channel, subscribe down below. And let me know in the comments below, what are your predictions for EUIC? What do you think of my meta share? Do you think there's anything else for the meta share that, could go up or down? Let me know in the comment section below. Catch y'all later. Bye-bye.